Hi everyone, this is Vlad from Modulus Render, and in this tutorial I want to show you how to achieve ultra-fast and sharp caustics using TheaRender and SketchUp. Now let's take a look at our SketchUp scene. I have these two tables from Miniforms, glass tables that should have a lot of caustics in the shadow. I actually have a reference image over here somewhere. So we should get an effect similar to this inside of Thea. The scene is very simple. It's a room with two openings, some light planes in the windows, and for the settings, I've chosen filmic tone mapping, highlights and shadows both at 25%. The ISO is at 400, and the lighting is with a sun. I've overwritten the color, and then some soft shadows over here with no sky, and I've put a white dome or an image-based lighting but with a white color on it, and the intensity is set to 10. So let's just look at the material a little bit. It's a glass material with two layers. It's fairly simple, and the thing we want to achieve is good caustics. Now if I render like this with no denoiser, okay, you'll notice there won't be any caustics in the scene. Right, we have the shadows from the sun, and we have some ambient shadows from the little coffee tables, but no caustics. Of course, there's no caustics because we haven't turned on adaptive tracing. But I want to show you guys a workaround that I did, which gave me a lot sharper caustics using textures overlays. For example, in this scene, if we would turn on adaptive tracing and caustics in this low light, we would get maybe some color in the shadows, and that's it. So the caustics wouldn't be sharp like in the reference image, like this. Right? They would be very, very blurry. So the way I fixed that is I took my objects that would cast the caustics and I put them in a different scene, a caustic studio scene. And I like to do that because if I turn on adaptive tracing and caustics in a, let's say, a more complex scene or interior scene, the calculations will take too long, and Thea would try to generate caustics for everything in the scene that is either metal or glass. So I don't want that. I want to control the caustics only on these tables, independent from any other object I would have in the scene. So what I do is I just copy my tables in a new SketchUp file, like this. I put a ground plane, like that, a rectangle, whatever, just to explain the ground plane from Thea does not receive the caustics, so they won't show up only on this infinite plane that Thea has. So that's why I put a rectangle as a ground plane. So this just has a gray value to it, so it's not, so it doesn't get overexposed. It's at 50 gray, and the material for the table, you remember from the original scene, it was set to thin glass. Now I've just put it to glass because thin glass doesn't give a lot of caustics, but the glass material, the simple preset from here, gives enough caustics or caustic effect. So the way I did this is I've put my scene here, my object, sorry, and then I want to put the shadow in such a way that it matches the direction of the shadows in my original scene. So it's that way, right? So in here, let me just see I'll show you guys the settings. So the material is just a basic glass. These are the settings for the color. And then for the environment, again, a manual sun, but with the intensity set to 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever looks good in your scene. The idea is that the more intensity we have in the sun, the more powerful or the clearer the caustics will be. Some soft shadow that maybe I should just disable this, but we'll see. And then that's it, just the sun. So no environment lighting, no sky, no white dome, no HDRI, just the sun lighting the scene, and standard tone mapping. So let's see how this looks. I set my camera from the top, or the top view, and in order to see clearly the shadows. And of course, adaptive tracing is turned on, and the caustics. So you'll see they're starting to appear. You can see them a lot clearer in the production render. Uh-oh. Let me try this again. And maybe start a production render to see how it looks. Now the resolution is set too high, so let me just stop this and make it more. Make it smaller. So now you're starting to see the caustics. And they're more visible because the shadow, the light from the sun is very intense. So we set it up to 6. You see, and they're starting to appear. And this is what we actually want. We want this kind of strong caustics in our scene. But because of our lighting, it's an interior, maybe it has some vegetation outside, a tree, or even some drapes on the inside, you won't get this high caustic. So what we want to do is use this render as a texture. And I'll show you what I mean. I want to put the texture at the base of our tables, just the shadows. Now here we see we have a problem because the table is going over the legs and we can't see clearly what's happening underneath here. So what we want to do first, you see they look pretty sharp. What we want to do is change the angle. So I'll change it to something like this so I can see this contour, and this way I can cut the tables out and use the shadows as a texture. Of course, using Photoshop. But this way, you get a very nice and crisp result. So bear with me now. Now I've changed the angle, and now I can start rendering. I've set up my final rendering settings, like maybe 3500 for the resolution. The material is simple glass. The environment the sun is, the power of the sun should be higher, so you get better caustics. And then the render elements or the channels we will use are color, object ID, material ID, shadow, and I think that's it. I don't think we need raw diffuse color. Just leave it on. You can check all of them, but after we render, we will save our file as a PSD, so Photoshop. And we just hit render. I'm not gonna do the whole render now, but it's a lot faster to render these tables with the caustics in this studio and then move it to the other scene than it is to render in the big scene all of my caustics. And of course, this is not foolproof. It works in specific cases where you want the object you're focusing on to generate caustics. Okay, so I'm just gonna stop it here and show you the process, and then after, of course, after it renders completely, you can save it as a PSD file, and it will save all the layers in it. Now, of course, I've already done that, and if we go to Photoshop, we get something like this. Like this would be the final render, and you see how nice the caustics look. And what we're going to do is we're going to use all the other render channels to cut out what we need from this image and use it as a texture. So let's get started. First of all, we need to select the tables. And then on our main layer, whoops, invert the selection. And invert the color. And the same thing for the shadows. We select everything and then come here and invert the selection color, and we should have something like this. And we will use this as a texture in our scene. Now here we might want to lower the dark values a little bit more or increase the contrast, because we'll use this texture as an alpha channel. So in this case, the margins are a little bit too harsh for me. So we'll just tweak the levels a little bit so we get something we like. Maybe like this. Okay, now we can just save. Let's say caustic texture tutorial. Just a JPEG will be fine. And we can save that. And now we come to our scene over here. And I'll just turn the texture on, right? And I've put the texture in the scene, try to match the table, and just lift it like 0.1 millimeter above ground so it doesn't intersect with the concrete floor. So we have something like this. and the material, we just put the texture in the diffuse slot, and then for the clipping, we use the texture, the same texture, but the desaturated, so we can bring the saturation down to -100. And I actually put the same texture on the emitter tab here, so it would have a little bit more lighting. This is not something mandatory, but if the scene is too dark or the caustics are too invisible, then I can bring them up by using the self-illumination from here, from the emitter. But it can work without it too. So let's see what we have so far. You see now it's completely different. It's transformed. The image looks a lot better like this. And there's no calculations or extra calculations for the caustic effect. We can play around. This is great for animations also. It's really fast, really sharp, and you can tweak how visible the caustics are in your scene by just increasing the emissiveness of this texture, or decreasing it, or increasing the contrast in the original texture to make it more invisible. And this is it. It's not something very complicated. It's fairly simple, but the effect is really good. So just to review, we have our scene, we have our objects that we want to generate caustics with. We copy these in our caustic studio, and here we render the caustics as intense as we want to by tweaking the power of the sun. And then we're going into Photoshop with all these layers, material ID, object ID, and shadow, and we do a little bit of Photoshop to get this texture. And this texture we use as an overlay here in our original scene, and we lift it like 0.1 point something, a little bit above ground, so it won't cast weird intersections with the ground floor. Now this is the final render that I did using this technique. If you found this information useful, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.